not where we normally are. We're not where we're supposed to be. Wait, you are where you normally are.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. I don't know. Actually, that's a good question. But where are we right now? Well, you may be able to tell from our badges here.
We're in Folsom.
We're in Folsom. We got Moneta Ventures right here. In Folsom, we've done office hours from their offices before. Although this photo is not of Sacramento. That's a little weird. That's not Sacramento. That is not the J Street Bridge. Yeah, that's. We are at Moneta Ventures office in Austin, Texas today. They have a dope office here, doing all kinds of great ecosystem work down here, just like they do back home. But we are in Austin, Texas, not just to hang out with our friends at Moneta, but also because we're here for South by Southwest. Woo. So Cameron and I are both on the pitch advisory board, so we help screen the applications for those who go into the pitch competitions. That's where we've been kind of spending our day, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We're doing a slightly different format today. We will always prioritize your live questions, so if you've got one, drop it into the chat, either down there on LinkedIn in the comments, or over to the side if you're watching on YouTube. Or actually, this thing why is it mirroring? It didn't used to mirror. They changed the whole interface. Now it's mirroring for me over there on YouTube. But anyway, happy to answer any startup questions that you guys have from idea to product market fit. But while we're waiting for you, instead of our pre-submitted questions, which we'll be back to next week, JDM.bio, hit the calendar. You can submit a question and get all that in. But instead of going through those live questions, the pre-submitted questions this week, we're going to talk about some of the themes that we're seeing in the startup space here at South by, and some of the awesome stuff. And we'll chat around that from a Traction Lab perspective, and talk about what we see and how that follows. And then if you guys ask any questions live, we will of course answer your questions live. So in our South by Southwest edition.
Or do we just call it South by?
The South by, it's a South by edition. Yeah, the Traction Lab South by edition. We actually, it's a TLSXSW MV.
There you go.
Yeah, edition.
Well, nice. Well, so how are you actually feeling? We landed at 1 a.m. this morning and we're rocking and rolling.
Well, they can probably see how I'm feeling in the stream, but I'm a little tired. Yeah, we landed like at 1 a.m. We had to go back to our hotel, which took an incredible amount of time to check in. It was well after 2 a.m. And by the time I actually went into bed, and then this morning there was, I don't know what to call it, renovations, I think, or something that they were doing at the hotel. The
Ritz. They were doing it.
They were doing it it was the Marriott. It's the Marriott. Cameron and I may have procrastinated on booking our hotel and did not get our room of choice. But so anyway, 6 a.m., which is 4 a.m. California time. So it's an early day. So I'm a little tired, but feeling pretty pumped from all the startup stuff. How you feeling?
Feeling good, but I think jumping in, we had quite the experience in getting downtown this morning. So I think as we think about sharing our experience here at South by, really trying to tie that to the startup experience. And so we had our first, or at least my first Waymo experience. So how did that go for you? And so how might we take some learnings from from that experience to the startup world?
Well, I believe the only way to start a Waymo story is, well, what happened
I won't be doing no more Waymo.
So we were just booking an Uber, and of course Uber's like, hey, take a Waymo, and so we're like, sure, why not? Well, of course we'll experience a Waymo, why not? And so we wait. The Waymo comes. We're standing outside, actually sitting outside like the hotel, waiting for the Waymo, and it pulls in and kind of drives past us, stops, then starts again, drives to the other side of the parking lot. So we kind of follow the Waymo over. Cameron unlocks the door, and it unlocks, and then immediately locks again. And so we're trying to figure out how to get into the Waymo now, and eventually we get it to unlock.
Well, but before then, someone started videoing us trying to get into the Waymo. They're like, look at these tech nerds.
Exactly. We're in some like Waymo fail TikTok video right now over this. But eventually the doors do open and we get inside, and there's a start button that you push. And of course the first thing we do is like take a photo of there being no driver in our Uber. And so we do that, and Cameron presses the start button. And as soon as he presses the start button, it says get out of the car. It says we've reached our destination and to get out of the car. Like, the car has not actually moved. They don't think it ever left park. And so then we had to call support to which took, I don't know, probably 5 minutes before we could even get on the phone with somebody, and another 5 or 10 minutes before they could get the Waymo moving again.
We're just sitting in a car with no driver.
just like the two dudes in like a squad car. Like, we're in the back of a police car with no one in there. And so that was it did get us downtown. They did get it remotely started, and kindly offered a $10 credit that when they issued it was $5. And then halfway here, while the Waymo is being a little bit weird on the street, we get another call from support who's just like, I saw you guys stopped mid-journey. And of course we wouldn't be like, no, we didn't. The journey never started.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that was our sense. Like, so that was what happened. That was what happened was that. So like I had certainly have some good ways to connect this to the startup community. Like, the jokes write themselves. Maybe like, oh, it's not ready for prime time, and I think that's where the lesson is. So since I told the story, why don't you kick us off into that, and then I'll add on.
Well, yeah. So I mean, someone who's pretty comfortable in terms of like trying out new technologies and was like interested. I don't have a particular pain point to like be driven by nobody. Like, for me, I don't mind talking to the Uber driver or having a human. I guess maybe JDM's a little bit more needing some space from the drivers. But and as we think of that was walking away. Yeah, it's not going to be my first thing to be like, I want to go back and do that. Yeah. Partly just from delivering that experience. And so oftentimes is like, as we think about tying out the expectations to what they're trying to get. And so, for me, I had no real like value I was trying to get out of it outside of just like, I wanted to get from point A to B. Whereas, maybe your early adopter would be more willing to battle through that type of experience, just because they like the other outcomes they're searching for is they wanted to be the person seen that was tech forward, right? So the social job that they were tackling was they wanted to arrive at South by in a Waymo, whereas like we felt like lamos arriving in our Waymo. And so like thinking of like, how do you tie that to the core value? And yes, does it need to be built maybe further for a later audience? And so like my first frame of mind was like really thinking about the diffusion of innovation curve, right? There's a set of adopters that are like more leaning into like, hey, I really want to hop into these Waymos because there's some sort of value they're trying to get out of it, just outside of getting from point A to B. Like they want something different. Whereas like for us, we just opted in because it was like presented to us, and probably was trying to sell it to someone who's not. And so when we think of bringing that into the, diffusion of innovation curve, if I'm someone more on that early majority stakes or the larger part of the market, you would have to over-engineer probably that solution and getting started, whereas your early adopter would be more comfortable in navigating some of those challenges. But what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think a couple of things, and I agree with everything you said. We talk a lot about crossing the chasm and like these early adopters before the early majority, and how do you do that? And this is a case where there are societal pressures to take us into driverless cars. And so like there's some inevitability to that. It's like, how do we get the technology to work? And so we're all part of like a large experiment, which messes with this a little bit, messes with the idea of like the majority. But at the same time, like they're trying to cross that chasm. That is what's happening. And there are lots of technical challenges to that. And there are lots of societal challenges to that. And, everybody, it seems, has a story about at least being inconvenienced by a Waymo, or they know somebody's been inconvenienced by a Waymo. But most of us haven't ridden in one before. And like we did, and it was not a positive experience. It gave us a funny story, but it's not really a positive experience. And so like, what does that then translate to? Like, okay, so this is the difficulty when we talk about crossing that chasm, and why it's really important in an early stage startup to actually really focus on the people who care about you. Because like, if you take like a net promoter score, like the idea of a net promoter score, you've all seen one, you've all done one before, but a quick primer if you're not familiar with it. The idea is you ask your customers how likely they are to rate you or to recommend you to their friends or colleagues or coworkers or whatever, depending on the context, how likely they are to recommend you on a scale from some 0 to 10. And the 9s and 10s are your promoters. And the 7s and 8s are neutrals, and 6 and below are considered detractors. So anybody who's like a 6 or less out of 10 actually isn't going to recommend you. There's some caution behind their recommendation. Like we're gonna be in that category probably, right? Like we're gonna say, you know, it was fine, like, you know, whatever, we got there, and then we're gonna tell this story it's not gonna help you. I think, right? And so like you're only looking, my point was like, you're only looking at those 9s and 10s are the people who count. And the way that score is calculated is you take the 9s and 10s and you subtract them from the 6 and below, and you ignore the 7s and 8s. And so like you're looking for those people all the way at the top, which ties back to what you were saying, of there has to be that pain that they're trying to solve. And if you try to jump to a broader market before you do that, you're not only taking the reputational hit, you're also wasting a lot of resources on people who are never going to adopt again. And that's not something that a company like Waymo is going to have as much of a challenge with. That part particularly. They have the reputational problems we all know, but like they don't have the other problem because they're capitalized up the wazoo, and because they know that they have to run these large scale citywide experiments in order to even validate the technology. So it's like a deep tech problem along with the normal shallow tech math. So like, yeah, I think it's just like, it's the classic early adopter thing. Like we're early adopters of all kinds of stuff. And we're early adopters about some of the same things and some different things. And everybody's an early adopter of something when the pain is severe and urgent enough. And neither one of us are experiencing that when it comes to like the driver. Yes, I would prefer there to be no driver. I would also, but you can see how—
Is that just like a human thing, or you feel safer?
No, it's just a human thing. It's just a neurodivergent thing. I don't want to make small talk. Like, okay, so
you don't have to make small talk. Just sit there.
Well, they try to make small talk with me.
Like you that's say I'm neurodivergent. Don't talk to me.
I'm tempted to do that. I'm really tempted to do that because it's like when I was younger, you know, and I used to like just go to a place to get my hair cut, you know, and so you wait in line, and then somebody cuts your hair. That was always awkward because they you know, they partially work on tips too, and they want to be friendly, and so like they're going to try to have conversation with you, and I don't want to have a conversation with them. And so I have like the same woman now who's been cutting my hair for years, and so we know each other, and so we can actually have conversations that make sense, and sometimes we don't talk, and like that's fine, it's all great. But like it's that social experience. But the way that like that completely backfired here, because for me the experience of having to talk to support is way worse than having to try to avoid the small talk with the Uber driver. And so it's like anyway, so like my pain is not enough to push me into that early adopter category, even though I would try it, as we did, out of morbid curiosity, which emphasis in this case on morbid.
Well, so one of the things, and I'm going to take us on a little bit of a tangent. So like you brought up this net promoter score, which is obviously tied to your customer engagement and their willingness to promote or not, or continue down the path of using your offering. And it made me think of our conviction score and like how we often like pull out the 7s. And so when you think of like, if you're getting an 8, 9, or a 10, like that's an investor that's willing to put you in front of another investor, or that's an advisor that's like, hey, this startup's doing the right thing. And so when you're hearing those scenarios we usually walk through, or you're maybe not getting those referrals, understanding like the reason why is like maybe they just don't at this point, based on the evidence you have or the things you're working on, have the conviction to continue to push those things forward. And so, you know, that net promoter score, although tied to your, customer side, is like that's similar framing that some of your investors and people are taking, particularly when we use it in our scenarios that we react to.
Totally. I think that's probably enough said on that. I mentioned before, for those of you just joining, we are of course going to take any questions that you have live. So feel free to drop those into the LinkedIn chat or the YouTube comments, the YouTube chat or the LinkedIn comments, and we'll happily take those. Anything startup related, from idea to product market fit. Just as a quick little reset here, we are live in Austin, Texas, at our good friends at Moneta Ventures. They have an office, of course, in the home base in Folsom, and then here as well. So it was kind of great to come and see them and hang out with them at it's actually a magnificent space. Yeah, awesome. It's a pretty awesome space here in Texas, but we're here for South by Southwest. I guess Cameron and I are both on the pitch advisory committee, or board, call it, to help screen applications for their pitch competition. And so that's why we're here, meeting startups and funds and investors and having all kinds of good stuff. And we're just talking while we're waiting for your questions instead of doing the ones that were submitted live. We're just talking about some of the things that we're seeing at South by, some of the interesting stuff. Lastly, we'll be back, normal everything next week. So please continue to submit your questions in advance. JW.bio, hit the calendar. There's a form that you can fill out to submit questions in advance. But if you ask them live, we'll answer them here right now. But otherwise, that was our first first big takeaway from South by.
For sure.
So let's do another one. So we're at this event. It's like a mixer event. There's a mariachi band playing very loud, the UT mariachi band. And we saw these guys with these t-shirts. So we had to go talk to them because their t-shirt on the right there. It says, AI built your MVP. Ask us to
how to scale it.
Ask us how to scale it. And so we're like, all right, let's go, let's go see them, because that's we're vibing with that. That's our thing. And so I want you to take us into that.
Yeah. So I mean, we went up and just were like, hey, we love your shirt. We'd love to learn more. What does that look like? We align with that ethos. And I think what was interesting was we're both tackling that problem, but from a different angle. And so maybe the framing I would put on, and then I'll pass it to you, was they were really tackling it around a feasibility element. And so as you're building these MVPs based on vibe coding and other solutions, as you bring on users and customers, the ability for you to ultimately get to scale with that baseline solution isn't going to be enough. And so they were helping translate that to actual proper, I guess, development is maybe I don't know if that's the right term, but that's kind of how I would take the way that they were doing that. And they help kind of build the systems and ability for you to scale on a technology side. And so we then were kind of bringing it from the desirability side. So it's how often are you getting people who vibe coded it, and then you're helping them try to scale the technology, but they don't have any of the users or customers to scale. And so one of the big things we were landing on was just the understanding of the game of people trying to get into venture capital. They think they need to raise the money just to build the solution versus going out there and proving demand and bootstrapping it until you no longer have the ability to do that. Then maybe you bring on angels or venture capital to help you get that growth engine going. So we had a lot of alignment, I think, where we would maybe differ, one, obviously in skill sets, but also in what is kind of the first core focus in terms of answering that question. So again, it was AI built your MVP, asked me how to scale it. And so for us was how do you scale it from a customer lens? Was one, you built the thing, do you even have anyone using it and getting value out of it? And are you capturing any value back?
Yeah, well said. I mean, we could have worn this very shirt with different logo on it, but we could have worn this same shirt to be talking about what we do. And it was super interesting that they're that it's two different sides of risk, right? There's the market risk and product risk, the two big forms of risk. And so they're looking at this from a product risk perspective. So you have this AI janky, hacked together kludgy solution, and it's not going to scale. So as soon as you start getting customers in there, you're going to encounter all the normal problems. And I believe in their words, it was because you didn't account for the edge cases in your prompting, right? So they're not blaming the AI tool. They're blaming it takes a special skill set in order to, just like it takes to manage an engineer, to manage an AI engineer takes a skill set too. And so they're managing how you scale this janky little thing. And on the Traction Lab side, it's exactly the same. It's just on the market side. So this janky little thing is these early sales that you've gotten, or some customers that you've gotten in front of, and it's kind of this piecemeal thing, and it's sort of hacked together, but you can't scale it. And this is the feedback that so many founders get from investors. They go to pitch and they have sales. That's it. They have 10,000, 20,000 in ARR, or even in MRR. At that point, they get some substantive revenue, and they're and the investors come back when you have more traction. What do you mean? I've got maybe even hundreds of thousands in ARR at that point. And they're why? That's a lot of traction. It's because you had these one-off sales that maybe you got through your network, or you got these ones at a conference, and then you got these ones through some cold outbound. You got these ones from this, but you don't have any consistent predictable path to getting more revenue. And so they're going to give you money to kind of figure it out, and that's not really what they want to do, particularly at that stage. And so they're saying more traction, and what they mean is this repeatable engine of growth. And so it's the same thing, right? Take this janky thing and figure out how you scale that janky thing by putting the right systems around that, the right process, the right operating system, to use Cameron's phrase for that, around that process. And what they're doing for technology, on the product side, we're doing with sales and growth on the marketing side, or on the market side. So I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I think it also just a cool shirt that we're hey, it's sparked an awesome conversation. And I think the interesting thing is just how I guess if you were a founder seeing that, how if we were wearing that shirt versus them, like who would you kind of go for based on where you're at in, in terms of stage, right? And I think a lot of times people like would be attracted to the feasibility thing, even though they don't have customers. And so like, they're like, oh, I'm still technically de-risking my startup, but you're investing resources into like the risk that might not fail your business currently, right? And so it's like, great, you built this solution, you got that fringe case, but like, have we even experienced that fringe case to know we need to build that? And so understanding like where you're at in the life cycle in terms of, and then additionally the evidence that you need in order to like make that investment of your own time and resources in partnering with, say either type of offering.
Yeah, it was so noisy in there because like it was literally this like brick concrete building, and they had like a 10-piece mariachi band playing there from UT, and like they're actually pretty good, but that makes it very loud, and so we're literally shouting at each other to try to hear each other. But so I didn't get a chance to ask what conversations they were having with people, because I feel like we kind of missed the opportunity to figure out where like what was this message landing with our type of people or with their type of people, and kind of conversations that may have instigated or incited.
Cool. So while we were there, we also had another conversation with like a biz dev person and the chief of staff of a
drone logistics company.
And so you want to share a little bit more about like one of the things I was unpacking was like, they talked about a lot about partnerships and things of that nature, which like sounded really great until we like peeled back the onions. And so onion, I guess, maybe had multiple onions, but and there was interesting partnerships. But would love maybe to chat a little bit more about like how that looks from a desirability standpoint and like how that repeatable path for them going forward.
Yeah, I'm gonna not mention the company name because I want everything I'm gonna say here is gonna be sort of approximate anyway. Again, mariachi band, and we had a fairly brief conversation, 5 or 10 minutes. But there were a lot of interesting things that I got out of it, right? So like it's a drone logistics company, which if you don't pay attention into my space, you see your drones. Yeah, drones are popular, and like you're either quadcopters come to mind or predator drones that come to mind, right? And there's a pretty big gamut like between a lot of that stuff. But if you kind of pay attention to some of the things I do from a hobby perspective, then you know how important drones are in modern warfare. And so when they said that they were doing logistics, they plug into a lot of these other drone companies and drone softwares to do like logistics and planning for drones that are deployed. The first thing that came to mind to me was for defense, because like the massive amount of innovation happening in the drone space by necessity by the Ukrainian military and a bunch of private contractors in Ukraine as part of the defense of the Russian invasion. And then on the Russian side, from like counter drone defense and then some drone offense eventually. And now we're seeing a lot of those same things on the Iran side as well. And so like there's this big bustling space with a lot of attention, a lot of interest, and a lot of money flowing to companies who can do who can do drone operations, drone logistics, make drones cheaply and efficiently to deliver. I'll just call them payloads because we're on a live stream here and we don't need to get tagged with anything, but with munitions oftentimes and other things. So the first thing I asked him was like when he gave me his elevator pitch was like, are you guys doing any defense work? Because that was just kind of my baseline. And like there's like I was expecting him to say yes, but that it was kind of secondary. And his response was basically like, yeah, that's all we're doing right now. But what they're trying to build are these dual use drones, which is one of the more interesting things because well, that's a whole like side path we could go down, but like why I wanted to bring up that whole thing about defense was that it's going back to like the Waymo thing, that there is a trend here. Like there is a natural curve that we're on. And like you can think from a few years ago when drones started getting really popular, there was like that wave that was going there. That wave is not over yet. And that is because that's a technology that's constantly evolving, and the needs and applications and uses of that technology are also really evolving as well. And so like they're in the space where they're trying to catch a wave, not on the drone manufacturing side, but on like how do you manage fleets of these drones that are actually in the air. So there's like that timing thing.
Yeah, can I add one? Yeah. So there's kind of this framework, and I think to continue down that line, it's like pestle, or there's other ways to put that, but it was like there's been an increase in like the environment around that, and so pestle really stands for like, is there political change that creates opportunity there? Are there environmental changes, social changes, technological advances? What's the other environmental?
I do STEEP, so it's societal, technological, economic, environmental, or political.
And then there you go.
So I don't know which one is missing.
Yeah, and so ultimately, like those open up new markets, and so like one of the major political ones is obviously the various wars, and now creating new needs for that type of technology. So like just always be thinking about new markets might be opening to apply that technology, and is there again from that like problem severity urgency, is that an area to deploy first because there's now an increased urgency based on one of those macro level shifts.
Right, and like the dual use, and I won't go too far down this path because I don't want to waste too much time on this one like little anecdote, but their dual use, one of the things that they brought up, probably partially because they heard we were from California, but was that they want to do for fire tech as well. So wildfire monitoring, also like probably some surveying and data collection. It's useful for predictive analytics with regard to like fire paths and all that stuff, and all that's of course being done with drones. It's cheap and efficient. And so like we know multiple companies, because we're California, we know multiple companies that are in that space of either manufacturing the drones or doing something drone adjacent or using the data from those. And so it's like you kind of make all those connections, but they have this market where there is an immediate need to sell into now, and it's a growing market that's like on the defense side. And then there's this other that's probably like a click too soon, right? That the timing isn't quite there yet, but they're like, that's our other play, is that we're also going to get into this space, but we're not ready for that. So like we're building these this dual use technology, but right now, like this is our beachhead that we're going to attack here in this like separate market that has a need for this as well. And the market's just not there yet. And so we're positioning ourselves because the timing is inevitable, which again, in this particular case, there's a lot of data to support that. So I think that's interesting. But you mentioned partnerships. As well. So like a common thing, like, and so this is a company that's raised a Series A. I think they said they just closed a Series A, maybe something like that. But like one of the common patterns that that we see in startups, I'm not going to apply this to them, but like is this like what counts as a partnership? Like we've talked about this a lot before, and so what you get when you hear like if you're anybody like us, which is who's not like just a random other founder, but somebody that a founder might want to extract something from, either capital or advice or services or connections, all that kind of stuff, then like how they pitch their startup kind of changes a bit, and so they have this, I'll call it polished version of like a story that they want to tell. And so it'll come out like, let's say, oh, we have these partnerships with all these, big brands or big logos, and this is how all that looks. And like it sounds like impressive at the surface of these conversations. So-and-so is interested in this, and we have an integration with whatever. You're like, wow, they've got all this progress. And those of us who are in like the more evidence-based side of it, like the data-driven or science-based side of this, start asking like, well, what are those? What does that translate to? Like, who are the customers you're actually working with now? Are those customers coming from these partnerships? And you start breaking that down, and this story. And I'm not saying this is the case about this company, but like the story often ends up being, I won't say a house of cards or like a house of mirrors or anything like that, but it does end up being that like it's far less impressive and a far less of a signal of eventual success, or a far poorer leading indicator of success than it sounds at first blush. And so like that's where like just for, and not only as you think about your startup, but as you're talking to other startups, you want to think about like, how does that, what they're saying, what I'm hearing, translate to an increased likelihood of success? And what would have to be true for that to happen? And right, so like if you think in the case of a classic, and those switch up startups for like an enterprise sales, thing, or some tool for enterprise, and they have this partnership, with so-and-so that works with all these enterprises. It's like, this is awesome with this big logo. And so like, how does that contribute to the eventual success? Well, the assumption that everybody's making behind the scenes is that partnership is going to lead them to more enterprise deals. So then the logical question is like, what evidence do we have that that's true? Right. Like that they're going to do that? Do they have any come through already? Are there LOIs, or is like, did they set up an agreement because they're getting some kickback, from this commission or whatever, royalty, depending on the model? Like, are they getting something out of this? And so like now we've set up this structure, and so like their intent and their motivation is aligned with that, or is this just, they work with a lot of startups with a lot of enterprises, and so we're connecting with them, and they want to kind of get in our space, and we're just going to be this tool in their toolkit that maybe they'll pull out someday if it becomes relevant, right? Like what is the case there? And so like that's where you can just start to peel back that onion and start to see like, what is it it's actually at the core of this, and is it actually a leading indicator of success?
I think the last thing I would add is just, this ties back to the earlier part of our conversation of like, is this actually these partnerships? Are they from the assumption people are taking? Is it tied to the feasibility or product risk, or is it the market risk that you're signaling? And oftentimes you're telling the story around it being a market evidence versus it being you actually set it up as a product risk thing. So it's like, oh, well, the nature of it is because we need to test out the technologies with these partners to see if we have integrations or what that looks like versus the ability to actually demonstrate value creation in that process, or is there willingness to pay for all of those components?
Maybe give the classic example of that with like a pilot.
Yeah, so I mean, oftentimes, like say you're selling the enterprise, you're like, okay, well, we want to. The ask is, we'd love for you to test out the technology, and it's an unpaid pilot, and it's going to be 6-month long pilot, and at the end of it, we'd love your feedback, and that's kind of your commitment to us is that we can meet on a monthly basis and get your feedback, and you're going to engage in this process, and that's more of the product risk, and that's oftentimes how we see them framed versus. On the more demand or market risk side is like if it is unpaid, there's actually a commitment in terms of them getting value out of it, and at the end of that 6 months or 3 months, that there's a commitment to say, here's what we're upon us delivering X value, whatever that core driving thing you're trying to get. The more you can quantify it, the better you can actually like have that conversation at the end of it. But here's the price that they're going to pay, and here's the terms of what that looks like. And so you're actually outlining an agreement at the end of it to say, upon you delivering sufficient value, they'll become a paying customer. And what we then see is the conversation's different versus their willingness to say, yeah, we'll try it out, and we're investing in your solution by giving you feedback versus we're investing in it because it's actually solving a problem for us. And the way you've quantified the value we get out of this actually has good return on investment for the future amount we would be having to pay for it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to wrap up a little earlier than normal because, as we mentioned, we are at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, hanging out with our friends at Moneta Ventures here today. Thanks so much for letting us use your pretty cool space in the Littlefield building here. But we do have time. If anybody does have a question, feel free to drop that in the chat. Happy to address any of those questions. Otherwise, we're just talking tales from South by Southwest. Maybe we'll do one more. Or
I was just going to say, maybe give a quick, we are integrating this into our Traction Lab podcast. So this has been a new iteration, and that's just, we found from a lot of you, our customers in terms of listeners have said, hey, like, we love your Friday podcast. And we're like, oh, this has just been office hours. We're going to take your questions and feedback. And so we're actually integrating this. We're going to still keep it branded as the Traction Lab Startup Office Hours, but that's going to be integrated into our podcast going forward. So definitely like and subscribe to that going forward. We'd love for you to continue to engage, and you'll have those kind of 2 different editions throughout the week. So
yeah, Traction Lab podcast, wherever you find podcasts, give us that 5-star review or like and subscribe, do the thing. But so we have this office hours version, lightly edited, will drop on Wednesdays in the feed, and then on Saturdays we'll have our normal Traction Lab podcast, which is a different format where Cameron and I take one topic and we talk about it for 5 minutes, try to be super compressed with like here's how we're thinking about it from a Traction Lab or from a science perspective, and then we dive into 3 contrived scenarios where it demonstrates that principle in action for better or for worse, and then we rate what we're hearing, the startups themselves, what we're hearing in those contexts on our conviction scale out of 10. Like, are we in or are we out? Based on that, so you can kind of hear how people like us think. If that's if that's your bag, Traction Lab podcast there, and this will start being in that feed as well. Awesome, cool. So yeah, the other thing while we're doing announcements, Traction Lab Venture School. Y'all need to plug into the Traction Lab Venture School. Check out tlvs.link if you want the details on that and the ability to sign up. But the Traction Lab, for those of you who don't know, is a venture building laboratory that works with startups to help de-risk them for equity investment using science. And so we've worked with dozens of companies over the last 18 months. Got some good metrics, successful exit, all that stuff. ... Not here to brag. And obviously we take all the credit for everything the founders did. And but no, not here to brag. But we're taking all that methodology and putting it into a slightly different format. So available to anyone, anywhere, at any stage can sign up for the Traction Lab Venture School, get a full year of support from the Traction Lab. All of our science-based tools are included in that. So you can figure out how to find exactly who your customers, get those early sales, and figure out how to make that into that repeatable pattern that you can just pour gas on in the form of equity investment if that's your bag, and scale that thing off into the cool side of the J curve there. Woo! So we're kicking off with our founding cohort with limited spots coming up on March 23rd. So time is kind of running out to fill that up, but we do have a few slots available. We got some cool startups, some high conviction founders that we're really looking forward to diving into in more detail. So you can check that out, tlvs.link. It's $750 for the whole year. So it's a whole year support for $750, kind of a steal. And if you are looking for a little bit more support, you can opt in instead to $3,500 for 6 months and get at one-on-one time with Cameron and I every other week, quarterly resets where we get into a room in person if you're in the Sacramento area, on Zoom if you're not, and do a deep dive to unlock whatever is next. This is doing it with you, not teaching you how to do it. We're gonna be right alongside you, helping you do that work, and then as well getting access to a bunch of Traction Lab stuff that's normally only available to our portfolio companies. So if you want to check that out, we're super happy with it, loving the reception we've been getting so far. It's been resonating with a lot of founders, which is actually super flattering. So like kind of humbling too, so that's great. TLVS.link, check that out. That's the last thing. That's the last shameless plug I have.
There we go. Cool. Well, cool. I think with that, thanks for joining us. We'll be off to the races here, but feel free to reach out if there's anything else. If you have questions on the Traction Lab Venture School, just DM us on LinkedIn here, and we appreciate you joining and tuning in. And with that, we'll end as we always do with a good old